move on. My biggest concern is getting my children safely to our destination, but persistent fans want to keep the conversation going. Some people think the show took away our privacy, and maybe our right to it, but before the show even began, folks would approach us. They wanted to see the kids. Let's face it, they're cute. I get it that people are naturally drawn to their sweet little faces. I understand people's curiosity about a large family with sets of multiples and the attention it attracts in a small town. But even then, I long to become inconspicuous and do the things ordinary families did. In those early days, people didn't approach us as much. They would, for the most part, just stand back and stare. If I had paid attention, I would have seen them pointing and counting, but most of the time I didn't even notice. I was usually so hyper-focused on making sure the kids got safely to our destination that I didn't notice people's reactions unless they made it impossible for me to ignore them, like the lady with the dog. A lot of times I would say, "It's nice to meet you, but I'm sorry, I have to get my kids in the car." The persistent fans were often more concerned about what they were getting out of me than having respect for my situation. That's probably where my perceived bad attitude toward the public started. Depending on the location, I tried to be cordial and kind, but I probably didn't always respond very well. Frankly, it bothered me that they wouldn't leave us alone. Sometimes they even wanted to touch the kids. I got very good about quickly stepping in between them before they could. These types of encounters caused John and me to long for what we called a normal family life. For us, normal meant being able to travel outside of the house with just the 10 of us, no chaperones. Normal meant my kids could get out and play freely, instead of being restrained in their strollers because we couldn't keep 16 chubby little legs from running in 8 different directions. In my fantasies about normal, I craved a quiet life where my family and I could go out in public without people staring, pointing, and counting my kids. It was hard enough trying to be a mom of twins and sextuplets without feeling like the world was watching everything I did. Safety is always a concern for parents of young children, but for John and me, any unusual concern had to be multiplied by 8. For example, what if our house caught fire during the night? That was one of my greatest fears. Physically, how would 2 adults get 8 kids out of a burning house? Every night before I went to sleep, I prayed to God to keep us safe from a fire. When the 6 were infants, the best plan John and I could come up with was for me to get Kara and Maddie. John would then pile the little kids into one big blanket and throw it over his shoulder like Santa as we all raced to the nearest exit. We knew that wasn't a perfect solution. The babies would roll all over each other, maybe even break a bone. But it was better than the alternative. We always kept a comforter under the cribs just in case of an emergency. But once we were in a new house and the little kids were no longer infants, we had to come up with a new plan. Though they could walk, you can't tell 6 2-year-olds, "Yeah, I know it's hot and smoky, but go ahead and walk down the stairs." No, they'd be terrified. We had to come up with contingencies for every possibility. What if the fire is at the bottom of the steps? What if one of them runs back upstairs to grab a comfort item? What if they're too scared to come to us when we call them? Other families had fire drills. John and I had fire interrogations. Another thought that kept us awake at night was who would take the kids if something happened to us. For many families, it's easy to find an aunt, grandmother, or close friend to take in a child or 2. But 8 kids? It was important to John and me that the kids stayed together. Who would be willing and capable of taking all of them? My brother and sister-in-law offered, but they had already had 4 kids of their own. It would be too much to have 12 kids in one house. Their intentions were admirable, and we were grateful for the offer. But 12 kids would send even me over the edge. We struggled to find a solution. Eventually, we put down our friends as the first choice to take the kids. We chose them because their kids were older, and we felt it wouldn't be such a huge burden for them to take all 8. I trusted that they would make family visits a priority for our kids in the event that something happened to John and me. House fires, parents dying, certainly those are extreme, unlikely events, but they are still normal concerns for most families. What wasn't normal was how complicated it was to address those concerns. We could twist ourselves in knots over the right thing to do. It was never easy. The decisions we had to make seemed harder than those made by typical families, and I longed for the simplicity of an ordinary-sized household. In my fantasies, these people's lives seemed much less complicated than mine. Ordinary parents cook pancakes, but most don't quadruple the recipe. Ordinary families buy bread at the grocery store, but few of them buy it